Okay, I will say that this is the largest audience I've ever spoken to, so I'm going to be one of the ones who reads from my script. I'm Robin. When I came up with the title for this talk, I wasn't thinking of the band Motley Crue. I was more describing our group of adventurers. Most people that I talk to about the trip would ask, where is the Catawagami? And my answer was generally, it's the last river in northern Ontario before the Quebec border in the red ellipse up on the screen there. I had paddled this river with one of my sons back in 2001, so in a fit of nostalgia and wanting my wife Hermione to enjoy the river as well, we decided to paddle it in 2019. Normally we do our major trips on our own, but in a bout of anxiety about safety, decided to post the trip on the WCA website. The maxim about safety in numbers may be true, but as the numbers increase, so do the complications. There was a flurry of inquiries. Some people knew enough about the river to be able to decide if they wanted to do it. Others would email questions, and some wanted to talk about it as well. Some of the respondents decided, probably correctly, that it was beyond their paddling level. Some joined the group, but as the date approached, realized that their lives were too complicated to fit it in. I'm not criticizing anyone with these comments. I know life is complicated. We settled down to being a group of 7 people in 3 canoes and 1 kayak. We were an eclectic international bunch. Although nearly all of us live in Canada, there was only one person who was born in Canada. The rest of us were from the USA, China, Taiwan, and New Zealand. Guess where the accent's from. Only Hermione and I had paddled together before the trip, and most people hadn't met each other before the trip. In my diary in Cochrane the night before it started, I did admit to a bit of anxiety. Despite my concerns, the end result was a good trip. So our trip started on the 30th of July, and we all met in Cochrane the day before. As we approached Cochrane, it was raining, and it lingered around as drizzle into the evening. The next day dawned grey again, but the sun came out later, and that was pretty much the end of the rain for the trip. Getting breakfast in Cochrane on the Sunday morning was a bit of a challenge. The first place was closed, as it was their annual holiday. The next restaurant was closed because of a power outage. But the Legion was open with their once-a-month fundraising event. They had a generator. We got lucky, a good breakfast, and a chance to talk to some of the locals. We met our shuttle drivers outside Tim Hortons, as it was closed with the power outage. Cochrane doesn't have a canoe outfitter at the moment, so Brian Porter is doing shuttles. And I feel that going to Tim Hortons in Cochrane is a bit like paying homage at a Canadian shrine. Am I audible now? Yep, it's sounding like it. And try again. Okay, and from my script. Okay, I feel that going to Tim Hortons in Cochrane is a bit like paying homage at a Canadian shrine. As Tim was from Cochrane, the hockey arena is called the Tim Horton Arena, and it has nothing to do with coffee. So the adventure begins. We drove up to Catawagami Lake under sunny skies and used the boat launch there to begin the paddling. There was a pausing for the obligatory group photo, and away we went. The river starts off being flat water in flat country, and that lasts for about 7 kilometres. A quote from my trip journal reads, "Initially there were rapids where I had them marked on the map, and then there were several more." And that comment somewhat describes the whole river. Even though most people on the trip had done research and I had distributed trip notes from my previous trip, nobody appreciated how many rapids there were on this trip. A couple of people weren't wearing life jackets on the first day. When questioned about it in the middle of some C2s, one responded with, "I didn't expect rapids like this on the first day." They then put their jacket on. The rapids didn't get off to a great start for me. It was on this one. On the first C2 at the top, I pulled a muscle on my lower rib cage. For some reason, I'd felt the need to do a big lunging draw, It was a bit uncomfortable for the rest of the day, and I could feel it for the next couple of days, but it did settle down. Then on the bottom of the same rapid, Hermione and I got stuck on a rock, but managed to jiggle ourselves off. We reached the campsite at about 4. It was the worst campsite of the trip. Tent sites were cramped, and the bugs were bad. It had been a late spring last year, so black flies were bad at the start. With the dry weather that we had, black flies diminished as the trip progressed, and the horse flies increased. We stayed at the campsite marked on our maps, but there is a better one about 1.5 kilometres further down the river. Talk to me if you plan to do the trip. The next day was easier, just long, with nowhere to stop easily. The paddling was nearly all flat water with only a few swifts. We ended up crossing Bailey Lake with a stiff breeze coming over my right shoulder. Emily and May managed to sail most of the distance across the lake. I had to paddle on the same side as Hermione to keep our canoe tracking straight. From here on, I would rate the campsites as good to excellent. We camped on a comfortable sandy beach, and the bugs were light. There were bear tracks on the beach, but they were just something to help us feel like we were in the wilderness, as the bear was nowhere to be seen. And this osprey nest was further down the lake on the next day, which is when the rapids began in earnest. Pineapple Rapids is 15 kilometres from our campsite and is the first C3 rapid. Emily and May ran it empty, while the others lined and did a liftover. We ate lunch at the bottom of the rapid and carried on. In the afternoon, we ran 4 Swifts, 4 C1s, and there was a C3 that some ran. There is a formed portage trail of about 100 metres, one of the few portage trails. Our campsite that night was a big slab of rock that stuck out into the river, and it lent itself well to floating down the river in the water with a life jacket on, walk across the base of the peninsula, and then do it again. Day 4 was when the rapids started to occur in multiples per kilometre. I won't bother describing them all, I'll just give a sample. One was called the Snout. The names on the river tend to be descriptive of the rapid. This one had a rock outcrop protruding downstream in the centre. It's rated as a C5. We lined the top part of it, then portaged 30 metres through the small bushes. One of the group fell in while lining, but managed to get themselves out. It sort of goes to show the importance of wearing a life jacket even while lining. To get to our campsite at Adrian Falls that afternoon, we paddled a small channel around an island on the left, then lined down a couple of ledges to the campsite. Yori did warn us that it would be buggy camping beside a falls, and he was right, but it was spectacular. In Adrian Rapids the next day, we had one of our more serious incidents. This picture is the consequence of someone else's misfortune, and we could see it from the campsite. Ours wasn't that bad. There was a communication problem in one canoe, and they ended up going broadside onto a rock. The rock was so big that the canoe couldn't do a classic wrap, and there wasn't enough current to flatten it. They were able to get out of the canoe and onto the rock. We got a line to them, which one of us walked along to get to them. With an extra person there, they were able to slide the canoe off, and everyone got back to shore with the help of the rope. All of their gear had floated out, but was salvaged by another canoe that chased after the gear. Prior to the trip, I had sent out an email asking that all gear be tied into the canoes. I had learned this from reading Bill Mason's books and have found this to be the best practice for us when tripping. I had thought that Bill Mason was the most revered name in canoeing and his tips would be universally followed. It would seem not so. In 2 of the upsets that we had, gear floated out, so it reduced the number of people able to help in the rescues as a canoe would go chasing after loose gear. We did a lot of lining on this trip, and I've always said this is the river where I had learned the technique of lining. Some of the group had never done it before, so there was a steep learning curve. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of it, but Yori and I felt made a great team lining the canoes down. Mays Falls is one spot where the trip notes diverge, with one talking of an 800-metre portage. You should not be portaging that far on the Catawagami. There's a maze of islands, but we managed to keep the portage down to about 150 metres over open rock down one of the centre islands. There were two more upsets that day that were simple, but it meant we didn't reach our campsite at Raindrop Falls until 6:30. The next day was more running rapids, lining, and a little bit of portaging. After a full day, we'd travelled 9 kilometres and ended up on a great campsite at the Needle. It's on a high, smooth rock outcrop with trees. Earlier in the day, we'd seen a column of smoke behind us, which did disappear by the end of the day. That evening, we had a red sunset as the sun dropped down through the smoke. Below the Needle is Arrow Rapids and Arrow Chutes, which is another complicated section where I did hear one story of a mistake that had serious consequences. We managed to thread our way through the maze. It ended with one of the longer portages at 100 metres over open rock. And this photo is on a later portage. I've been told that lichen grows at about 1 millimetre per year, so this is old lichen. It has that neat concentric circle thing as it grows out from the centre. More paddling, lining and portaging brought us to Frog Song Falls, where we were able to have a rest day. People read and swam, some paddled. Emily and I went upstream a couple of kilometres to run rapids again. This is one of them called Autobahn, while Yori and May went downstream to scout what was coming up tomorrow. We were getting closer to the Hudson Bay lowlands, so we were starting to see geese. At Frog Song, there was an orphan gosling that was squawking around in the area during both evenings. It even came up onto our campsite to check us out on the rest day. On day 9, the first rapid is the Devil. The trip notes described it as a weird, dangerous rapid. It looked to be a reasonably simple C3, but after running it, there was agreement that weird is appropriate. Bill and Jane are next. Bill was a straightforward C3, but Jane has a tricky drop with a large boil immediately after. 3 boats got down okay, but Hamani and I flipped on the boil. I pulled the canoe out with Chad's help on the brink of the next large drop 100 metres further down. The finale is the last major rapid. It starts with a 400-metre C2. There is one story of a canoe taking on a bit of water at the top of the run and slowly sinking further as it progressed. The paddlers exited the canoe before it went over the main drop. The canoe was recovered by others below. We made our way down cautiously as a consequence, scouting short sections before running them, and pulled out at the right place for the short portage. One of the group did get a little concerned when they saw the C5 drop coming up and exited their boat. There was still lots of room before the drop, but it had been a fairly tight rock garden. After the finale, there are a few C2s that are simple, and we ended up camping on an island 8 kilometres further down. This was one of our more awkward campsites, which is the one that's up now, but it was still pretty good. We did much better for campsites than I had done 18 years earlier. On that trip in this section, we had pitched the tent on the limestone gravel within a metre of the river. On the last day of paddling, we paid the price of having 10 days of dry weather. There were about 9 kilometres of shallow limestone swifts where we all had to get out at various times to float our boats through. In this section, we had the wildlife highlight of the trip with a woodland caribou walking along the shoreline about 7 metres from us. I had previously camped on an island at the confluence of the Catawagami and Kesagami, but when we got there, most of the sand island was gone. We carried on downstream. It was low tide, so it was difficult to get ashore. One spot that some people got out to look at was deemed unsuitable, so we decided to carry on to the eco lodge where we were to be picked up, as we knew it would have solid ground. We stopped at the junction with the Harricanore for some food to give us the energy to make it to the lodge. May was one of our creative cooks and quickly got her wood stove going to make some soup. By the time we had left, the tide had obviously turned, so it pushed us up to Wash Our Lodge, reaching there at 11 hours after leaving our campsite. It was good to be able to sit inside and not have to worry about the bugs. Our shuttle drivers showed up about an hour later and made us welcome. The next morning, Michael cooked us a breakfast of bacon, eggs and toast. We needed to catch the 9 a.m. high tide, so we're on the water shortly after 8. The run across Hannah Bay to Moose Factory was dead calm, which my stomach appreciated. We got a glimpse of a pair of beluga whales. I had to go up to the band office to pay for the shuttle, which gave the rest of the group time to look around the Cree Interpretation Centre. They were having a staff appreciation day with a cook-up in the Sabtuan. Then we were dropped off at Tidewater Provincial Park. After setting up our tents, we paddled back to Moose Factory to look around. It had been a major Hudson's Bay trading post dating back to 1673, and a number of the buildings have been preserved. We had our first ice creams in a while and ate supper at a restaurant in the band building office. While there, a local woman offered to show us through the Hudson's Bay staff building, as it has a museum on the main floor. Thursday dawned overcast and drizzling. By the time we left, the drizzle had stopped and it was just misty. We headed off into the mist to the town dock, and then came the longest trip up to the train station from the dock. The train left at 5 and pulled into Cochrane at 9:40. Two of our group left from there, while most of us stayed another night at the North Adventure Inn before heading home the next morning. Some of the numbers on the trip are that for Hermione and I, it cost $1,150. And that's the cost of train fares, boat shuttle, 2 nights accommodation in Cochrane, vehicle shuttle, gas for our truck, and a night at Tidewater. There are 66 features on the river that are C2 or greater. We portaged 9 times and lined 15 times. There are only 5 rapids where we simply portaged the whole thing. And I'll give a couple of thank yous. One to Yori Miller, who put a lot of hours into preparing the map sets that we used and appreciated. The other is to Sean Hodgins of Wanapitei Canoe, who was the one that inspired me to do the trip in the first place back in 2001. He described the river as the best wilderness canoe trip in Ontario, and I figured that he is someone who should know. When asked why, he responded that it is because of the number of runnable rapids and its isolation, and I would agree. Both times that I've paddled the river, I've never met anyone else, and there are a few signs of other travellers. Thank you.